Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. We are here for session 2 of our SBIR STTR webinar. I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. We have a really great and another really great session for you. Last week was a lot of fun, and we're going to have more fun with our panel talking about our business executive and commercialization plan, followed by a session on finance and accounting. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. Again, my name is Beth Duermeyer. I'm the Education Concierge here at Innovation Partners. And I want to remind if there are any students on, this is a maroon-based event. I apologize for the kind of blurry photo here. But if you want points and you want to be entered into monthly drawings for cash prizes, make sure you download the Maroon-based app and get checked in. I can send you more information about that if you would like, but all you need to do is search for Maroon-based in the App Store for that. And there is a chat box. Those of you who are new to Zoom webinar, there is a chat box and there is a Q&A box. So make sure if you have a question for our panel today or for our speaker, Ram, on finance and accounting, that you are sending those questions in the Q&A box. Lene and I will kind of be helping to manage that. We have Dana Evans on here as well, who's going to be helping manage that. Just know that during our panel that we are going to start here in a few minutes, our panelists are going to introduce themselves, and then we'll start with the Q&A. So I hope you have some good questions for them. Also keep in mind that this is a recorded event. So just make sure you're not saying anything you don't want out there, because this is public, okay? We will provide digital copies of any PowerPoints that we use this afternoon as well as next week. And we also have them from last week if you would like a copy of those. And I just want to do a quick plug for my role here as your educational concierge. We have a lot of resources that are available to faculty, to staff, to students, and to community members as well. We do have a podcast called Idea to Impact, where we talk to faculty, community members about their commercialization experience. Jose, I think, hasn't been a guest yet, but he will be. That was on my list of things to do, is to talk to Jose about that. But we also have resources through Tech Transfer Central and Autumn, and we also have several courses on the continuing education site about things like IP protection, patent data, and things like that. So make sure you stop by our website and check those out because they are wonderful resources. So with that, I know that was very fast, but I want to go ahead and get us started on our panel. So our panel today is going to be moderated by the wonderful Chris Scotti. Chris is our very new Director of New Ventures here at Innovation Partners. And this is something that he's very passionate about, this topic. So he was really excited to moderate this panel. I sent him an email and asked him, and he responded within 5 minutes or so. So I'm really looking forward to having Chris moderate, as well as listen to our amazing panelists. So with that, Chris, why don't you take it away?
All right. Thanks so much, Beth, for that flattering introduction there. Yes, I am excited to do this. SBIRs and generally startups are something I've been passionate about for a long time, and I'm not going to spend a bunch of time, telling you my background, because most of you heard last week as we in the panel that I did on the first session. But real quick, as a reminder, I am the chair of the New Ventures competition, along with being the director of New Ventures, and I actually wanted to make sure that this group remembers that they're invited to come to TNVC this May. So that's May 19th and 20. Sorry if my volume's a little low. I'll switch it here in a minute. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to each of our panelists to introduce themselves. and give them a few minutes to tell you a little bit about their background. But I've known all three of these guys for quite a while, and know that this is something that they're not only passionate about, but very knowledgeable about. And these three folks have helped hundreds and hundreds of businesses in the time that I've known them. And the results have been very cool out of all three organizations that they represent. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Caleb Holt to tell us a little bit about his background and the relevance to SBIRs, and look forward to hearing from you, Caleb.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris, and thank you to Lene and Elizabeth, Beth, for putting this all together and making it work. So my name is Caleb Holt. I spent 11 and a half years at TEAX, Texas A&M Engineering Extension Service. And the last 8.5 years I was there, I managed what was called the Product Development Center. We did two primary things that are of great interest as it relates to the SBIR program here. From 2014 to 2019, I was a testing and evaluation manager for the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate for a program called Emerge and a program called City Labs, which stands for the Smart City Internet of Things Initiatives. And in addition to that, from 16 to 19, our team managed the technology transition program for the Pentagon. So we moved DoD technology into the public safety space. Over the course of 3 years, we identified over 3,500 different technologies. We brought 35 to town. One guy's wife went into labor as he was headed to the airport to come out here, so that guy didn't come, but we brought 36 companies to town. We down selected to 9. We used $1.5 million of defense funds, and we turned that into $27 million in revenue by September of 2019. I used the SBIR model very specifically to transition into the private sector. So I did 10 years of what I call public service through full-time employment at TEAX. And in the summer of 2019, I helped write 7 SBIRs for 6 companies. And August 6th, all 6 companies won an SBIR. And we have then taken that into a company we call Axlebox Innovations. And we are a technology development firm that's based here in Bryan College Station. We're specifically focused on product-based businesses that enhance public safety, first response, and armed forces. And we also happen to manage a nonprofit known as SafeTech. And SafeTech was traditionally this community's commercialization nonprofit, especially back when Governor Perry had the Emerging Technology Fund. We have corporately transitioned that into something called, originally was known as Research Valley Innovation Center, formerly known as AM Innovation Center. And we currently call it Make Safe Tech. And due to COVID, we made the transition to where membership in our nonprofit specifically results in us providing assistance in writing SBIRs. And I'm very proud to say that today we're about, depending on how you count, we're about 18 months old. And we've helped companies win around $68 million in SBIR funding. The biggest of that went to an Aggie-led company for PhD advanced material engineers out of Texas A&M University and the Ascentium team. So we helped them get their direct to phase 2, and they turned that into a Strat 5 for $60 million last year. So everybody else got 8 million, which we're pretty happy to divvy up between other companies. But we just put 6 more companies into SBIR world. So very honored to be on this. Very honored to have both of my mentors with Matt and Jose on the call. And thanks, Chris. Look forward to the conversation.
Great. Thanks, Caleb. By the way, can you hear me a little better now?
Yeah.
All right. So next up, I'd like to introduce Jose Quintana. Jose and I have known each other for a heck of a long time. So I'm really excited to hear what he and his experience, and excited to hear him tell you guys about the world of SBIRs. Go ahead, Jose.
Thank you, Chris. And also very, very grateful to be invited to present today to talk to your audience. My background is a little different because I'm older than my dear friend Caleb. Actually, I probably got, when I started, I actually took advantage of the SBIR program back in the 90s, and was very lucky to get an SBIR with the Navy and another one with the Air Force. And that was kind of the extent of my personal experience with applying for SBIRs. Then fast forward to this century, we have an entity called the Innovation Underground. It's a technology and business incubator, and we help companies go through the launching process. And we're not an accelerator, we're an incubator. So some of the companies are with us for, 3 to 6 months. Some other companies are with us for 2 to 3 years. And it really depends on what their commercialization path is. I would say about 10% of our companies actually leverage the SBIR program. There are some specifics. It's a great program to leverage. However, there's some timing issues, some kind of dynamics with the speed that you can put into the development of a company. So we try to make sure that the opportunity is adequate and is compatible with a particular startup process. Our incubator, we have at any given time between 40 and 70 members, companies. About 35% of them are usually from other countries, mainly from Europe, from Belgium and France and Germany and so on. A few of them are from Latin America, actually 3 of them. And then the balance are going to be from the US, with most of them from Texas, but we get some kind of virtual members or members that are here only once every 3 months that are from California or from Austin. And they need the specific type of support. We not only help them with the business development side, but we also help them with their technology development side. And the SBIR is one of the programs that we help with if that's an adequate program for the particular startup. So with that, again, thank you very much, Chris.
Thanks, Jose. Next up, I want to introduce Matt Prochaska, another guy that I've known for many years and known in the organization he represents even longer. So appreciate all you've done for our community, Matt. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience with SBIRs?
You bet. First and foremost, howdy, everybody. I'm Matt Prochaska, class of 86 and 97 with my master's from A&M. And I'm so delighted to be with you all today. Beth and Lene and Chris, thanks so much for hosting us. And thank you for this really important topic for us to discuss today. I'm the president and CEO for the Brazos Valley Economic Development Organization. And what we do as an organization and corporation is really help companies pretty much in every area that they may need, including working with them with SBIR and SBA. Part of what we do from a community standpoint in terms of economic development is really the networking side, as well as helping with reviewing applications, working on financing, working on really networking and thinking through the viability of the concepts that the companies are working on. And we've done that over many years in many different industries, touching on many of the wonderful attributes that we have, obviously, here locally with the Texas A&M University system. I was working with some of our state leaders this morning, and they were talking about the Brazos Valley, that there's something magical happening here. And there really is. And so much of that we owe, of course, to our partners at Texas A&M and the university. But behind me as well is we have a staff team of 6 members with great experience in all of these areas and very much willing to help. One of the things about us is we are not for profit. We're a 501c6. And so we can really come alongside the company and the individuals that are seeking these applications and seeking this funding really as an advocate to help in a real unbiased manner. And so we're excited to be with you all. I feel like we're just among friends today, so it's a lot of fun to serve on this panel. And Chris, it's a real privilege. So thank you for inviting me.
You bet, Matt. Thank you. So now we're going to switch into a little bit of Q&A section. of this panel. And I just want to remind folks, and I'll kick it off with a couple of questions, but I want to remind folks that if you have a question, please post that in the Q&A section. That's that little Q&A should be in the bottom middle of your screen. If it looks like mine, please ask your question there. And or also, if you hear something that you would like a little bit of expansion on or a little more detail on, please post that up as well. And I'll see if we can expand on that a little bit. So to kick things off, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to tell me a little bit of something. As you know, many of our audience knows and are already great at the research and technology sections of the SBIR and STTR grant applications, but where they may need some help and really could get some value out of your experience is on the business side. And not only would I like to hear your thoughts on the business side, I'd like to hear what you think about why it's important. Why do the different agencies care about the business side of the operation and when putting together an SBIR application? So let's go in reverse order. Matt, you want to kick us off?
You bet. I think the business plan is the most important part of the process. It's really, when you think about technology and transferring that and commercialization, is there a viable market? Is there a viable product? Is there a viable concept? So viability, I think, is the key. And that's why that business side of the application of all of this is such a critical aspect of it. Obviously, you have to have the concept or the idea to begin with, but beyond that, really thinking through the financial side, thinking through just the logistics, the management, and really working through the proper plans for the future, I think, are really essential.
Thanks, Matt. Very cool. Jose, why don't you take it away next?
Yeah, obviously the SBIR proposals are very short, especially, the phase 1 proposals. So you need to be, very careful how to balance the value proposition. And as Matt was alluding to, in our particular case, we try to make sure that our entrepreneurs know that they have to have a very strong commercialization path, being able to not only deliver a clear understanding of the next steps, of how the product or service or the technology is going to be deployed and is going to interact with the consumer behavioral aspects of it. You have so many different, from medical devices to military applications. You have to make sure that you have the end user's mind in properly represented in the proposal. The other aspect is going to be dealing more with the letters of commitment that you can receive early on, so you can show that you have already talked to some of the industry partners, either on a B2B perspective or with some of the R&D alliances. That has a lot of weight. So being able to put that ahead of time, don't wait until the end to get those documents, because it's not that fast. I mean, you have to have, in many cases, you're talking to very large institutions that require time to be able to offer a simple letter of support, letter of commitment, or letter of interest.
You're muted, Chris, but I think I'm next.
Yes, sir. That's all I said. You're up, Caleb.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to expand a little bit on that point there, but I wanted to make a couple comments related to this topic. Just building off of what Jose just said, the first thing I wanted to tell you is that, we look at, traditionally, we look at about 750 to 1,000 deals a year. And our first test is, did the entrepreneur or researcher, did they Google their market before they came in? There is so much information online right now, and specifically when we're talking about SBIR, it's across, it's across the entire federal government. My knowledge and my expertise is specifically around the Department of Defense, a little bit in Department of Energy, but Department of Defense is so open right now. There's so many events, there's so many, even virtual events. There's AFWORK challenges. There's all kinds of events And when Jose talks about, getting those stakeholder engagement letters, if the SBIR is the first time you're engaging DoD, your chances of going in are about 50-50. You've got to have people inside the walls that are willing to try to pull your technology into it. And I'm just going to be very frank. Everybody on this call that's tied to A&M, based off of my expertise and what our team does, you're at extreme advantage because you have the ability to leverage STTRs, which is technology transition that comes specifically from universities and works with university labs. We specifically have a 2-star general that we work with on the Air Force side. And we bring him tech and he's always asking us, do you have any STTR for us? So the second thing I wanted to mention, I'm going to use 2 phrases that we talk about here. One is technology optimization, and the second one is market channel development. So we don't refer to anything at our organization as marketing. We refer to it as market channel development. And I will give you an example. It is not sufficient to say that your technology will help law enforcement or will help the Air Force. You have to get very granular and go way down deep and say, is it going to help a pilot? Is it going to help a mechanic? Is it going to help someone on the runway? Is it a healthcare that is specific to hearing loss that has occurred specifically to something they experienced? Is it people who are actually out on ships, or are they land bound? You've got to know, down to the T who you're going after. What I tell people on the law enforcement side is not enough to say you're going after law enforcement. Tell me the technology, its best use case is in the correctional system, or it's in highway patrol, or it's in beat cops, or in de-escalation of mental health patients. The one thing I think that sometimes gets a little scary, and again, 11 and a half years at A&M, I've been around a lot of researchers, is if we say business and commercialization, I think we lose context with the researcher. I think the question and the thing that we're trying to communicate with you guys is, who is the person that has the problem that you have the solution to? Who is it that you can solve their problem? And if you can tell that story, and you can really clearly identify who that individual is and what their needs are, you can sort of go from there. And if, I'm not joking, a lot of this stuff is super Googleable. Find out how many pilots are in the US Air Force. You can Google that right now. It'll surprise you. There's only 1.5 million enlisted people in the US Armed Forces. Blows my mind every day that that's the number. There's 888,000 law enforcement officers. There's 1.3 million firefighters. That is the market that I deal with on a daily basis. And so if you take a very structured approach and you're able to tell through your proposal, this is the problem that I'm solving, you don't have to have the biggest market, but if you have the best solution to a big need, that's something that they're going to be interested in.
Chris, may I piggyback on a couple of things Caleb said?
You bet, Matt. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just feel like it's really important to go back to the roots of SBIR and think about the fact that this is for high risk, it's for early stage, so don't be afraid of it. I think there are a lot of folks that say, well, I don't know that I'll qualify, I don't know that I can get it. But one of the things that we have to remember is this is all about economic stimulus. So does it take, or does it take into consideration, or will it create a new product or new products? In addition to that, will it create new jobs? And for me, those are the business, that's the business side of it that's so essential. And I think that's what Caleb was really alluding to, is there a product viability out of it, and will it create new jobs? And if it won't, then you need to rethink it.
Thanks, Matt. We did have a question come in, and I actually think it's a good one for all three of you from my knowledge of your organizations. That was specifically directed toward you, Matt. So I'll start with this, but I'm going to tee this up for the others as well. I think you can highlight some of your partnerships in kicking this off, and then I'll turn it over to Jose and Caleb. So does the Brazos County Economic Development Center, Economic Development Organization, I know what it stands for, offer or serve a way to access technical and business mentors for SBIRs as they move to commercialization?
Oh, absolutely. That's probably the key thing that we can offer is the referrals and the networking. What a great question, and thank you. That doesn't mean that we house that expertise among the 6 of us within our organization, but what it means is that we reach out to the incredible resources through Texas A&M and the Texas A&M University system, and even beyond that, depending on the particular technology. I know in particular, we're doing a lot of work internationally as well on a global basis, but for me, it's all about networking and finding the right fit from a technology standpoint, from a partnership standpoint, financing, mentoring, just wisdom and knowledge. It really does, and I know it's an overused statement, but I'm going to say it anyway, it really does take a village. And I think the proverb that talks about there being success in many advisors is very, very apropos when it comes to this topic today.
Caleb, how about you? Tell us a little bit about the role of mentors in your organization.
Well, I mean, you have to keep in mind, my mom is a geriatric psychologist, so I grew up in retirement homes. So I've always played or very much valued finding elders and wiser people than I to kind of guide me along the way. I was 6, to give you an idea, I'm older than I look. 6 years ago, I was a president of College Station Noon Lions Club, which we grew from 148 to 200 members. But the one thing I just want to stress to this group is that one of the things we really did in a little tweak and modification of the mission statement around Safe Tech, when we transitioned it from Research Valley Innovation Center to Safe Tech, is we opened up the national ecosystem to help them all understand that it's our belief that the Brazos Valley is the mecca for creating public safety and defense technology. So we put together a national advisory council. We have 13 members from all over the country. We have access to offices in Sacramento, in Oregon, in Las Vegas, in Denver, in Chicago. And truly, we have an ability to bring people into our community. We're beginning to start doing that now in probably this 2021. We're starting to see companies begin to start traveling here to Bryan College Station. They weren't doing that last year, but they're starting to now. Obviously, the state of Texas is a little bit more open for business with COVID, obviously with precaution. But we are actually in the middle of putting together some mentor networks, both on the end user side. And then Matt has introduced me to the concept, and this is something we'll be doing later this year. Hopefully he's going to take me up the road to introduce me to the manufacturing consortium based in Waco. And we're really focused on bringing a manufacturing consortium here to the Brazos Valley with Matt's leadership and kind of toolage of how we should go, because we're currently in the process of setting up 5 manufacturing facilities here in the Brazos Valley.
Thanks, Caleb. So I'm going to take a little bit of moderator's privilege here and remind everyone that the organization that I represent, like I told you last week, if you are part of Texas A&M University, please come talk to the office, the TAMU Innovation Partners office, and I will help either get you the resource you need or find you a mentor that has done this before. We have various different partners, including Lene Scroggins' office, Office of Commercialization Entrepreneurship inside of engineering. This is a big piece of what we do. It's very important to us that we get you the help you need to be able to fill out the business and commercialization sections of grants like this, because ultimately those funds end up coming back to the organization, at least in part, that we work for further research in our lab. So this is a huge success metric for our office, and we would bend over backwards to make sure that you get the help you need to be successful. So moving along here, we got a couple of questions that just came in. So this is a pretty specific one. I'm going to throw it out there because I don't recognize some of the acronyms. If we need to punt on this and follow up afterwards, I'm sure we can. So question is, we just won an O&R grant on sensor technology. Will an STTR and SBIR be the right mechanism? As only a smaller member of the system, how can we utilize the expertise or get help from folks like you? So
They want a contract. They have an O&R contract.
yeah, they just want an O&R contract on sensor technology.
Naval research.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of that, you could definitely use an STTR to get it out. We have 4 technologies licensed from Naval Research Laboratory, which obviously we work with the T2 directors at O&R. So it is a possibility to do that. The other thing is, through your existing contract, it is possible to get a MIPR, which is a follow-on of funding from O&R into your contract for commercialization. It would be like moving from, phase 1 to phase 2. I've seen that done pretty effectively. John Ryan, who used to be the T2 director for the Office of Naval Research, has moved over to Homeland Security. So I know that depending on, the specific applications, sensors is all the rage right now. So depending on specifically what the technology does, they might be interested in using the Economy Act to move dollars from Homeland Security through that same contract. So it's definitely something that can be done. I will tell you, without question, eventually you would need an outside business partner to pull that technology from the university into the commercialization stages. But assuming you find that, and I would assume Sensor Tech is very interesting, and there's a lot of people interested in that. I know Jose Quintana has a lot of great companies down there that write software on top of Sensor Tech. So between the two of us, we would be interested in at least looking to see who it is and who in our portfolios might have interest. But it's definitely an avenue. The only caveat is that you would need some outside entity to help utilize those dollars for commercialization.
And as far as the SBA goes, we've got folks like Timothy Jeffcoat and others that can help, that are specialists with SBIR in terms of the process. Now, on the technology side, obviously, we would need to work with those experts, potentially through Texas A&M or the A&M system. But, phase 1, remember, is only like 10 to 13% success rate. Phase 2, I think, is like, 40 to 50%, Chris and Lene, somewhere in there. So, again, getting some advice early on, I think, is key. And as far as the Brazos Valley EDC goes, we're happy to make some of those connections for you. And again, if you're not satisfied with that, then we go back to the well and keep looking for the expert that's going to fit the actual question that you may have in your particular proposal.
Jose, anything more to add on that one?
No, not really. The only thing I wanted to point out is that, if they're gonna evaluate the potential or the value of an STTR or SBIR, they need to start fairly fast, fairly soon, just because of the time that it takes to know, first of all, to know if you get funded, and then to put together the contract and start receiving funds, and then being ready to jump into phase 2. As Matt mentioned, you are more in the 50-50 probability of getting phase 2, depending on the agency. But you need to be already planning for that from the onset of phase 1. That's the best way to tackle that.
The other thing, remember, I know we have some amazing international, global reach here with those that are on the phone. 51% has to be owned by an United States resident individual. So that's a key component in the process. And so try to work with someone that is a US citizen in order to have that 51% for the application if you are not an American citizen.
Thanks, Matt, Jose. So got another question submitted by George Gillespie. Texas A&M University has a medical school with a lot of clinical and pharma tech development. Is there a path to navigate FDA clinical protocols for approval in a public health setting? And I'm going to give it to you guys first, but I'm happy to help answer this one as well if needed. So does anyone want to step up and answer that one?
I think you'll be better suited for that. But let me just mention that we have a couple of medical devices that have actually received SBIR funding. I think one is from NIH, the other one is from NSF. And, the path that we follow is really based on the cost side. And then we work with other universities, not just A&M. Specifically, we can use an animal model. So we have one of our startups working with Purview A&M, other A&M system members. And then obviously in Chile and Argentina, there's a good path just strictly from a cost perspective that makes it a little bit more affordable. But within the university, I'm not sure if there is a support network. So Chris, I think you'll be better suited for that.
Sure. Though you did a great job teeing up why this is important. This is a gap. And really, it sounds like what you're asking here is an area that's filled by regulatory consultants, which I will tell you that I don't believe we have a formal organization inside A&M. I know a few folks that have done really well in regulatory consulting in their professional roles, or they've helped to guide their own devices through the regulatory process. But I'm not going to say that that's going to be the be all end all, because really, if you're going to be navigating the regulatory process, it's capital intensive. In order to get that capital, you're going to have to demonstrate relationships with a regulatory consultant that knows what they're doing. All right, not just giving you advice on the side, that actually is engaged in either an employed or consulting manner with your organization to be successful navigating the FDA process. So what I'm going to tell you is we can help internally to help you identify the best regulatory consultant to engage with. In fact, we've got a couple that we use inside Texas, that are core partner within Texas A&M New Ventures competition, that we'd love to introduce you to when it gets to that point. But internally free, not so much. No, Matt?
And also add to that, Department of Health and Human Services obviously would be one. If you're thinking more life sciences, potentially USDA and then NIST. So those are the ones that come to my mind. But obviously, you've got to get a little creative in that. It's going to depend on the particular technology or idea that you're thinking about and where it might fit.
So while waiting for a few more questions to come in, I'd like to have a little bit of expansion on something that we talked about earlier. We really opened with, and that is why that granting agency actually thinks the business section is important. Why do you think that it matters to them to do this? This isn't just a checkbox. This isn't, some bureaucrat coming in and wanting a little more busy work. Why do you think it matters to them and ultimately to the success rate of the companies that they fund?
I can tell you legally why.
Yeah, sure. Hey, that's a good one.
There is a congressional mandate that any funding, federal funding that specifically goes into a singular company for the development of technology, for whatever the actual end purpose is. There's a few very, very highly classified areas where tech does not qualify. But I can tell you everything I've ever seen under SBIR has a congressional mandate that it will make a reasonably feasible attempt at commercializing technology outside of the DoD. The reason I know this is that is the exact program that we ran for the Pentagon from 2016 to 19, where we had to show commercially reasonable attempt to bring that technology outside of the DoD. There's significant advantages to the DoD if that technology is not 100% dependent upon, or, a customer or a business is not 100% dependent upon the DoD to be its sole source of funding. I.e., let's say you make a very important tire for a vehicle, and if the only client you have is the DoD and they decide to postpone or do a continuation of funding, which we're really good at in this country, then you as a company might go under. And you have a singular product that is actually critically vital to a vehicle operating functionally because you make the tires that everything else works off of. And so it's a risk mitigation tactic that any smart business, including the federal government, doesn't want to get into a position where they're the sole provider and sole funder of a singular piece of technology. Now, you could very easily convince me of a few major defense contractors that are dang close to it. But that's not their concern. Their concern is the little startup companies that won't make it past the 5-year mark.
I think the other thing is just a very basic question that SBIR asks. Does it improve a person's life medically or in other aspects socially? That's such a basic question, but it has to be, yes, helpful, but also, very innovative. And I think sometimes that can be missed early on, and you have to ask yourself that tough question. And is it practical? And will it lead to job creation and potential economic viability? And if it won't, maybe SBIR is not the right route.
I wanted to mention just two very simple things. One is, I think Caleb actually mentioned this very early on today, but really you have to look at establishing the relationship with someone within the granting agency that has a need. So that's really an easy path. And for instance, NASA is famous, or at least in some instances, famous for leveraging STTR and SBIR funding to complete some of their to supplement some of the research budgets. So they will go out of the way to help you get in and qualify for an SBIR if you are catering to that particular need. So that's a very good way to leverage the program and the relationships. And then some of the other agencies are going to be more into just being more procedural about it. They have a specific a set of goals, and as you will see when you review the SBIR offerings or the topics, they in many cases look at some kind of redundancy approach where they will fund not just one, but maybe 2 or 3 of the top proposals per topic. So you have, again, you just have to read well, make sure that you are not forcing yourself too much, and that your technology or your core set of research value aligns well with that topic.
Thanks, Jose, and all 3 of you. And I'm going to wrap this question about importance to the agency, the business side being important, up with a little bit of experience of my own. We run the new venture competition for going on 7 years now. And one of the cool things that we can do is look at the characteristics of the companies that go through the program. And I could tell you that by and large, the companies that do well and continue to thrive for years after we see them is they have a diverse team with business experience behind them. They've demonstrated that they've got business experience. So the key takeaway I'm trying to make sure our audience understands is that that granting agency knows those characteristics too. They know that a company that has business experience leadership can write a good business section of their application is more likely to succeed. And guess what? If they're going to continue to get funding from Congress going forward, they need to be able to show that their awardees are successful. They're not just giving out free money here for a company to go away and then go get another SBIR. They want to see these companies be successful and these technologies get to market so that they can continue to justify why they exist. So that's an extremely important takeaway I hope folks got out of the discussion here. So we do have another question. And this comes from Mr. Sheng, and he says, is there any regulatory restriction on an SBI awardee? He means the company itself. And as an example, he says there's a restriction on like foreign investor funding. I'm going to add an additional piece to this because I know that's important, and he may have meant, is also what about citizenship of the leadership of the company? Do any of you care to answer that one? Foreign investment and foreign leadership. Jose.
Sure. So yeah, as far as the small business concerned, the entity that gets the award needs to qualify by having at least 51% of either citizen or residency in the U.S., as Matt mentioned earlier today. From the investment perspective, that's when you can get I don't want to call it creative, but you need to get, you need to be careful on how to structure the investments. Because again, the SBIR itself is a non-diluting contribution to your company. So if you can kind of pause a little bit and then say, okay, well, if we are applying for the SBIR and you haven't received funding yet, this is how we're going to structure it so that you continue to preserve and honor that requirement, right? And then there are also other ways that are fairly popular in how you can take funding with a convertible instrument instead of equity. So many ways to do that. Just have to make sure you do it properly. Don't cut any corners. It's not worth making a mistake there. So be careful.
I'll just make one comment on that. I'm just gonna guess. They say if you do something for 10,000 hours, you're an expert. Well, I'm no expert, but I know I've seen 10,000 SBIRs. And I'm saying the likelihood of a foreign direct investment existing in a company that's bringing a technology out of a university is close to lightning striking. It's not something that I have ever witnessed. Now, there are certainly, in Texas A&M University is a great example of this, technology companies, specifically Belgium, because of some of the work, and then also the OWIN network, the Open Worldwide Innovation Network of universities and companies that come and work with Texas A&M University that maybe do a continuation of research, and that is the specific piece that's going to be spent out. But then you would need that 51% ownership or a 51% American citizen, just as Jose mentioned. But I understand the possibility of it. I'm just giving you the advice that it's extraordinarily unlikely that scenario would play out where using SBIR dollars or STTR dollars.
Exactly. Okay, I think you guys both covered this one well. So I've got a couple other questions that have come in. This one's from George Gillespie. Please mention, please talk a little bit about the role of like a A&M professor, or to me it's a scientist from any university or research organization founding their company versus a startup hiring a non-academic CEO to run the firm. So tell us a little about some pros and cons there, especially in regard to the way the agencies might interpret the application, the SBIR application, and tell us a little bit about your opinions on getting a research-oriented CEO versus a business experience CEO. Who'd care to take a stab at that one first? All right, Matt.
Yeah, I can say, from my perspective, it really depends on the individual. And it really depends on for example, a researcher or professor at A&M, for example, what are their personal goals? What do they see themselves doing? What do they want to do? I think often, whether you err on one side or the other, there's challenges. And so having input from both the business and the research side, I think, are critical. I do think typically from a researcher standpoint, maybe for most of the professors and researchers I have spoken with, they oftentimes will say, I don't really feel like I've got enough business experience. And so getting that help or that advisement from the business perspective, I think, is really critical. I think the other thing that comes into play often is we have to think in terms of a time frame. Phase 1, 6 months. Phase 2, 24 months. And so oftentimes I think researchers are in a world thinking much longer term, whereas the business world is typically thinking shorter term because there has to be that return on investment. And so if you need a business partner that understands that, it can help push you towards that as a researcher, by all means do it. If you feel like as a researcher, you really have a good grip and understanding of that, then go for it. And then also just, again, think through what are your personal goals.
I'll interject real quick that the comment I made about if the first time you're talking to DoD is when you're submitting an SBIR, your chances of winning are pretty low. I can tell you that there's a number of things that go into this. So we specialize at Axlebox Innovations in what's called dual purpose open innovation SBIRs. These are for technologies that are already out there in the world. They expect them to be very well managed and expect business personnel to lead those organizations with experience. But if you're looking at a very traditional SBIR, and the truest intent of what SBIR is intended to do, you're talking about early stage R&D research. It absolutely has to be led by the researcher. There has to be a proof of concept and design that has scientific experience and honestly degrees that back up that individual representing as the principal investigator. So there's not a cookie cutter answer to this question, but I just want to say that obviously I'm biased at Texas A&M University, but I don't think there is a university in the state of Texas at a minimum that does a better job giving you access and resource to people outside your domain. So the Aggie events that they have for students, the MBA Venture Challenge, everything that Blake and his team are doing over there at the McFerrin Center for Entrepreneurship, your exposure to business people and people outside your degree program, in my opinion, over the last 10 years has went 100-fold. And now Innovation Partners and the Maroon Base, where they're trying to bring these different organizations together. This is the best thing in a university ecosystem that exists. And I just want to brag that the only time to date that Texas A&M University has won the Rice Business Plan competition was Triceum, which was the Ascentium group that we helped win a $60 million strategic StratFi. Now the MBA kid is no longer with the team, but the two guys were advanced material engineer PhD candidates. And they went to an MBA challenge, they went to an ideas challenge, and they found an MBA student to stand there and understand the numbers and spit out the economics of their deal. And they won. And I think that was, in my opinion, that was the greatest thing that set that company apart, is they realized their weaknesses and they didn't complain about it or write about it. They just went and found someone that could fill that void. And I think A&M does a great job giving you guys that opportunity. But Chris, to answer your question, it really depends on who's going to review it. And we know that at the detail level, AFWorks used to review these open innovation contracts or proposals, and now the Air Force Materials Command does. So they now expect a much more technical proposal than they did 18 months ago.
I would agree. It's that, the intersection between theory and practice. And if there's not practice in it, it's not going to work, but there's also got to be the theory. The other thing is before you even ask that question, does it meet a specific need or solve a specific problem of the agency that you're working with? If you can't articulate that in a very succinct way, you probably aren't ready.
So, Chris, I think that the question had to do with whether or not to have a CEO be the faculty member.
Yeah, the professor.
Okay, so just from experience, I only know 2 faculty members that actually lead their companies through A&M.
Probably the same 2 I was thinking of.
Yeah, probably. And but the majority, they just don't have the time to mess with the procedural aspects of receiving a grant, accounting, bookkeeping. There are a lot of things that go into that. And then more importantly, being able to talk to the customers or prospect customers and all that. So what I see for the most part is a faculty member developing a relationship with an entity that will support that part of the deal and actually help with the company formation and all those type of things. So
you guys are exactly right. And I'll just throw in and say, I've experienced and seen very few companies be successful that remain led by an academic founder. I will say it happens. I know of a couple, but the characteristic that I can think of in both of those companies is that academic founder knew when to step aside as leadership of the company. or step into an alternate role. They went on to hire a business experienced CEO when it was time for them to raise significant funding. It might have worked at this stage or an SBIR, but to eventually succeed as a company, I can't even think of any examples that have done extremely well with a purely technical founder, certainly that retains their job, their academic role at the university.
I just want to make one more comment on that is the experience piece. So I'm young. I'm a somewhere after before millennial, but after the ones before us. I'm in that 80 to 85 gap. But the point is, there is a point in time where the statutes and the tradition of the federal government does look at experience to carry more value than a lot of other things. And they will check your LinkedIn profile. We've had a PI that actually we changed it to me being the PI. We're very fortunate they allowed us to do that in the contract negotiation piece. But they absolutely want to make sure that there is the level of experience, and that level of experience is very critical to your pricing per hour. So if you come in and you've just graduated and just received your degree, you're gonna have a hard time convincing the government you're worth $250 an hour.
Right.
So we had a part 2 on that question, and that was about graduate or postdocs running. I think folks can sort of guess the answer to that, but as that, rather than following up on George's question with that, we got another more detailed question I think will answer this even better. So Andrew Robbins asks, I'm currently helping a startup write an SBIR, but I have some concerns about the qualifications of their team. Now, to be clear, they seem to be relatively sophisticated in terms of their business plan, and they have good advisors, but their CEO is a full-time medical student, and their one actual employee is who they intend to be PI on the SBIR. They're fresh out of his bachelor's degree. So is this a no-go for an SBIR? And the other ones have, just like you have said, his other companies he's worked with have seasoned CEO when applying for an SBIR. So graduate student, full-time medical student, and the PI on the SBIR. Who cares to answer that specific question for Andrew Robbins?
I would submit it if I had an MOU.
What do you mean by MOU, Caleb?
So when I submit SBIRs, the reason our success rate is really high is now we primarily play in what's called a D2P2, a direct to phase 2. We don't do a ton of stuff in the phase 1 because of that change to the materials lab. The phase 1 that I play in used to be a 90-day, $50,000 contract, not the traditional 9-month, $150,000. If it is not possible to get your technology in front of somebody in the military right now. There's so much being done to give you access to these individuals to ask questions, find out who they are, connect with them through LinkedIn. I'm not joking. I don't have the piece on my desk right now, but let's just assume it was something that looked kind of like this, and honest to God, it did. This is what I took to the Chief Innovation Commander at Texas Military Department that got Ascentium their first contract. So get it in front of the right people, get an MOU, and great things will happen. I don't think it's a no-go, but if you're just shooting in the dark, I don't think the experience enough is a reason to, I wouldn't count them out for that. Find someone who's interested, who has a need, show them your solution and get an MOU, which is literally a document they send that says, hey, we're genuinely interested in this at the 49th Air Wing, or we really want to see how this would work on a C-130. That MOU can be submitted as a supplemental document in your SBIR, and it's a huge way to get kudos in the reviewing room.
I think I'd need more information to answer that question, but thrilled to talk offline with that individual if they'd like to contact us.
Jose, anything else to add on this topic of team before we close it out? The characteristics of the team members. That's important.
That example, I've seen that happen. I've seen entities with young leadership being funded. So I wouldn't use that as a no-go step. But obviously, having a really good PI is usually what's going to give you that level of that will increase your chances to get the SBIR. Yeah, I wouldn't pull out. As far as the perfect team, gosh, if you can have somebody that has the industry experience, it really depends on the program. So as Matt said, probably need to look more at what's the end objective to come up with a good mix, a good suggestion on that.
Just as a real practical point, the SBIR, there's got to be a 51% involvement by the PI at the time of the award. So if that person's not 51% in, that is a no-go, but I don't know the specifics on this particular.
So great answers to this, you know, and I'm just going to add here on this team front. I've seen very few come through and successfully raise money from investors that still have a purely technical team member, still have that and actively enrolled in school and pursuing a graduate degree. And, you know, at least in the investor world, they would love to see a company that might at least recognize that they have a gap in their team before funding them. But that's the investor world. Do you guys think that it's the same for the SBIR granting agency? You know, if someone's going to apply with a technical lead in their company, if it's only a for now thing, should they admit that gap in experience and talk about their plans to hire someone to fill it?
You know, as part of the commercialization plan, you know, those are the points that you have to underline, right? So I think that's a really good way to put in place a scalability, you know, strategy. So that's a very good point, Chris. Now, from the investment side, obviously, once you have an SBIR or two, you can leverage that, but that's, you know, another topic that's for you know, post-funding commercialization efforts. So yeah, that definitely will be a good path to follow.
Any other last comments on team, Caleb or Matt?
I don't think you can have the void. When I say, are you Googleable, you can not know that you don't have the void, right? You can be like, I thought me and Chris were good enough. After that meeting, I realized we needed Jose to help us. And now they don't have to be 51%. You can definitely write in, look, me and Chris are pretty smart. We're going to get this figured out, but we know that we have to have Jose Quintana's help because of his experience in doing this. And the reason I tell you that is because if you don't, you'll get beat by everybody who does write a proposal who did already find Jose Quintana. And that would simply be mocked up as laziness by the reviewer part, in my opinion, because you're not the only person applying for that opportunity.
Thanks, Caleb. Got another question from Adrian Guzman. He recently launched two infant company spinouts from A&M. These were medical device companies, and they were developed during his time as a PhD. So they applied and they're being awarded. Congratulations, Adrian. DARPA SBIR phase 1 for one of the companies. So there's question is, as we begin to think about phase 2 and future funding, how feasible and when should they apply for the additional phase 1 or 2 grants from the other agencies? And if the mission or project stage are different, but the essential backbone tech's the same, is it possible to understand you can't receive funding for the same work? I mean, they know that they can't receive the same funding twice. Caleb, I know this is your domain, so I'm going to throw this to you first.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts?
So assuming you just won, you may or may not be in union yet. Adrian, I can't see your response at the moment, Adrian, but there's this thing called union, and it's a really great marketplace essentially for everybody who's participating under a particular phase of SBIR. So right now, I think it's 21.2, $21. Second round of SBIR is the union that I'm in. You're absolutely correct. You can't get funded to do the same thing. But from what I understand, from what I just heard, you were a brand new company who's never actually potentially received SBIR dollars before, and there is an ability to use TAC-FI and STRAT-FIs to provide additional financing to your company. That is a kind of a coveted document that I will share with Lene and Beth and Chris to share with this group on what a StratFi looks like. But specifically what you have to do to make that transition into phase 2 is you have to clearly identify stakeholders. And I genuinely feel like today there is a greater concern and effort among DoD branches to try to share this information because there's so many open events that are occurring. There's a lot more openness in sharing those companies back and forth across. So Union, I think you'll see as a great marketplace of other people who are in your same vein. And my experience in the companies we've experienced on there, there are many people in there who've won hundreds of, almost, we'll say tens of millions of dollars of SBIR, and they can help you get connected all across the military branch. But a TACFI and a StratFi would be your best bet to take those end users that you're going to be engaging across other branches and get them to basically follow on funding into your existing work so you can get more work to do to accomplish the same goal. That way you don't have to worry about, are you being funded on 2 different contracts? TACFI and StratFis allow you to do that. And that's what we were able to help Ascentium do. And they were able to get a 1-to-1 to 2 match. And, so $15 million came from the Air Force, $15 million came from SBA, and then 30 million came from outside investment. So there's definitely a way to do that. What I would tell you is just a little bit of caution, and obviously DARPA is probably even a more complicated than anything, because it is sort of the advanced research piece of DoD is reporting out your discussions across the military branches with DARPA funding. I know, like if you have an Air Force contract, I relate it to fire and law enforcement. They both work together, but that doesn't mean they always get along. And so be careful, using that DARPA at the Marine Corps or at Air Force. Just genuinely be more technology focused. Say, we've got this technology, we're developing it, we have a grant right now. And genuinely, in my experience, they're going to care more about learning about your technology. And then they'll ask you where your funding came from, rather than ask you where your funding came from and then ask you about the technology. So just a little piece of advice there.
Also, remember, 2/3 of the work must be performed with the phase 1 budget, and then 50% of the work has to be performed with the phase 2. So that's always a critical component in terms of budget.
Thanks, Matt and Caleb. Great detailed answer for Adrian. Thanks for the question too. So I'm going to take another moderator's privilege here for just a second, and take advantage of the fact that we've got the speaker from last week that covered this 51% question that keeps popping up in the chat. We tried to answer this via chat, but I'm just going to tag Lene in on this. Why don't you help drive this point home, Lene? Because folks asking about the 51% requirement with co-PIs, as well as the 51% involvement and ownership. What does it have to do? Is it their total income? Is it their time? 51% of the total award has to go to the PI. Help us understand this a little bit, Lene.
Well, there are 2, and I don't know that I might even punt to Ram because I know he's going to have, these are 2 separate questions. The PI's involvement, whether it's an SBIR, which is different from an STTR, the PI's involvement is going to be different with those grants. So you need to look at the type of grant, you need to look at the qualifications for those grants to begin understanding the PI involvement. The 50% owned by a US citizen or permanent resident alien, that's completely different. That's a company status, not a PI status. Matt, am I making sense with that?
Yeah, that's exactly, you nailed it.
Okay, so they're two very different questions. So with an SBIR, broadly with the PI, the SBIR, the PI has to work for the company. 51%. They have to be paid and work for the company. It doesn't mean that they can't have a partial faculty appointment with a research institute. That's done all the time.
Lene, correct me if I'm wrong, but that PI does need to spend at least 10% of their time on the project.
I believe so, yes. And it actually it could be more than that, but I do believe that it's at least 10% of the time.
10 is the minimum.
Correct. And generally, no, I don't even want to say that. Generally, in a phase one, that PI is probably going to spend more than 10% of their time on it because your company isn't mature enough to have a whole bunch of lab techs to do the work for you and you just guide the project along. It can happen, but I think it might be a little rare.
And Chris, let me go backwards. I'm sure y'all hear this in the like the sponsored research space, but this was something they had to pound in my head a lot, is there's only 100% of your time. And
Right.
so to that question that Guzman asked about going after additional units, there's only 100% of your time, even though I'm here to tell you there is more than 100% of your time available to be an entrepreneur. The federal government recognizes 100% of your time as 40 hours a week.
Right.
You can't be funded 200% across 4 different at 50 apiece. That's a huge no-no.
Right. Great comment, Caleb. For an STTR, the significant difference between SBIR and STTR, there's other key differences, but a couple of the most key differences is the STTR has to have a license agreement with a research institution, has to. SBIR doesn't have to, but may. Also with the STTR, the PI can be with the research institution, does not have to be employed by the company. So looking at the differences in those programs and then looking at the individual idiosyncrasies within the funding agencies is what you need to do. And again, as Beth and said over here, all of this, most of this was covered at least at a high level last week, but I have a lot of resources, links that I put at the end of my presentation. Your best friend, when you get started thinking about this, is sbir.gov. Ron can probably also add on to this either now or in his presentation because he has a great deal of knowledge in this area also. But don't confuse PI participation and what the company needs to be doing and where they need to be doing it and who's doing it. And don't forget that the SBIR and STTR, the funding has to go to the small business concern, the small business company. It does not go to a lab and a research institution. You do that through a sponsored research contract.
So in follow-up to this, Jean Sheng asked whether the company is going to need to provide timesheet certification after the award.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Good to know.
You have to have them ready all the time. You don't always have to turn them in, but if you get audited, you do. Chances are your chance of being audited when you get a large phase 2 is great. Chances are you will be audited. So there's lots of good templates out there for timesheets. I have one on my computer. Anybody wants one, I'll give it to you. But timesheets are definitely one of those things that you need to use in your SBIR, STTR company. You have to.
Absolutely.
And do it every week, because you trying to make up for it a month later for all the different people involved in that contract, it's a nightmare. Same with accounting. Do it all the time and do it consistently, because that's the only way you can stay up on it.
I just wanted to point out one thing, Lene, to piggyback on what Caleb was saying before, as to people have to do Google research on search on all the customers and targets. The most important thing people miss out is whether their idea or whatever they're trying to do is already existing in the marketplace.
Right.
And then one is it cannot first. And then second thing is you cannot go back and propose as an incremental enhancement to an existing technology or process or service. And that's very important. People, they don't fund that. Caleb can say, back this up, if he can.
You're muted, Caleb.
Yeah, I mean, I will just, I can go pretty deep on this topic, but, freedom to operate, it wasn't even in my terminology until 2010, 2012. We worked with technologies, or we have personally worked with a lot of technologies that have been victims of patent trolls. And to a large degree, that is also sort of what I was referring to when we asked whether you've Googled, whether you've Googled even the USPTO.gov. I mean, the US Patent and Trademark Office is literally a Google bar. And if you think that warm toothpaste is something that the world should have, you should go look up the patent I found in 2015 around warming toothpaste before you use it. So if you've not taken that precaution, I think that you're gonna struggle pretty significantly with this. The other thing I'll tell you is that now this is Caleb's personal belief. I believe that everything that's ever been invented is already been invented. I think everything that's here will be made better by advanced materials and sensors. And so that application opportunity is very, very unique. Smoke detectors, as an example, is something that this has been well done. I actually, I have mouse traps on my desk because I genuinely think someone created a better mousetrap. It blows my mind how cool this one is. But what I was going to say about smoke detectors is now we have vaping, and vaping is a huge thing in public schools. And so the sensors in which can detect vaping versus cigarette smoke are different, but it's still a concern that wants to be addressed. And so that's sort of my question, but I can go really deep on why patent trolls is a thing and what administrative body created that, and Michael Porter and the innovation ecosystems and clusters and all of that. But just Google it. It's absolutely free to do. And Texas A&M University has one of the few on-site IP libraries. And I don't know if Janet is still there, but take your ideas to Janet at the IP library over on Wayner, and she will absolutely help you realize how ununique your technology is.
Excellent conversation there. In fact, I'm gonna wrap this topic up by giving you a tidbit from my recovering entrepreneur hat. I actually feel like we're expected to have 30 plus hours in our day. An entrepreneur is expected to have greater than 24-hour days, whereas the government, says 100% of our time. So as a recovering entrepreneur, I didn't get a whole lot of sleep, but that doesn't necessarily apply when you're putting in your application with the government. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the Q&A portion. We've got one question in the Q&A. Caleb, if you have a minute to answer that, it's specific to you, you can answer it via text. But I wanted to give each of you an opportunity to give some closing comments, maybe a minute each, on why you feel like SBIRs are an important program, why this is an important piece of what you do, and just kind of close us out today. Jose, I'll throw it to you first here. Will you wrap us up?
Sure. As I think you are fully aware, it's all about timing, right? It really depends on your commercialization path. So I think that, the SBIR program is not for everybody, but if you have the opportunity to leverage that and your release of the product can wait that, extra year and a half while you go through you put the energy needed to do a good job of your contract, your SBIR or STTR contracts, then that's definitely a great opportunity, because that opens the door for additional funding, and then you don't have to dilute your position as much. So, and also in regards to timing, it is sometimes there's a difference between the market potential and what is casted in the topic of an SBIR schedule. So just make sure that you are not going against the value proposition that you have developed, your technology and so on, and make sure you're clear on how you create these opportunities. And if you think you're going to need a couple of SBIRs, well, be very clear at the beginning so that you can segregate your technologies, there's different components, into fundable opportunities. That's really a good way to leverage that. And for years the government has been saying that STTRs are really designed to help you start a company, not to keep your company alive. So keep that in mind as well, even though there are a lot of companies that actually that's their business model, is just getting SBIRs. The way they're getting around that is by saying, okay, we're doing this as a service to our population of scientists and inventors. But when we go to after post phase 2, there are already commercialization partners willing to step in and help you scale up your company.
Thanks, Jose. Matt, closing comments?
Just taking myself off mute. I'm going to segue to the next section and just say, remember the single most, the factor that leads to the greatest success in an SBIR is partnering or working through or with a research institution, especially a university. So I think knowing the audience today, you've got a leg up on this, and I'm excited to be a part of it. That's where the success is historically and statistically. And so we're here as panelists, and I know Lene and Chris and Beth are here. We're here to help you. And so if there's anything we can do to help you, if we don't know the answer, we'll go find it.
Thanks, Matt. Caleb, any closing comments real quick?
Yeah, so I'll go super fast. So the government has a problem, and let's assume it cost a lab $1.5 million to try to come up with a solution for it. What SBIR allows is 10 companies to try to solve the same problem at $150,000 a piece. So the same 1.5 million. So you have 10 companies and the lab. You have 11 people trying to come up with a great solution. I'm dedicated to public safety and first response and defense, and 11 ideas trying to bring that solution to the market is a huge deal. At the end of 9 months, it cost that lab $1.5 million to run again. And the lab goes, you know what, out of these 10 companies, those 2 have a very likely option and potential solution for us. So let's fund them at $750 a piece. And now you have 3 people advancing a solution closer and closer to the market. And, at the end of the day, even if the lab ends up being the victor and bringing the best technology, I'm going to tell you from experience and working with T2 directors at 280 federal labs, seldom do they win. Seldom do they bring the technology into the marketplace. They're going to look at one of those 2 companies who's been working alongside them to pull that technology into the market space. And I think that's the beauty of the SBIR STTR program.
Thank you so much for closing this out, Caleb. I want to say, we're out of time now, but we have a great speaker coming up, and I want to thank Caleb, Jose, and Matt for taking their time to talk about this important program. And SBIRs and STTRs are, I said this last week, they're part of this is a representative of what makes our country great. We recognize that one of our greatest assets is our knowledge. And I know that I've appreciated hearing this from each of you. Look forward to hearing from Ram, and I'm sure that many in our audience did as well. So lots of virtual applause going on right now from wherever our audience is at. Thanks, guys. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Beth Durmeyer, who many of you know from last week, to introduce our next speaker. Thanks so much, folks, for your time. Enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was great. And thank you to our panelists, Caleb and Jose and Matt. Thank you for giving your time. I am going to turn it over to our next presenter, Ramaswamy. I'll let him introduce himself. I'm going to launch a poll here real quick if anybody wants to answer that while we are transitioning over. So Ram, if you want to take it away, we are looking forward to your presentation. You're muted, Ram.
So, thank you, Beth. You need to allow me to share my screen.
You should be able to share. Can you click the share screen button down below?
Yeah, let me do one. Let me open up my presentation. Give me 1 second.
Those of you who are still on, go ahead and take, if you would like, answer those poll questions. Just kind of getting some general information here. All right, can everybody see Ram's screen? Lene, can you see that? I see it.
Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Great. My name is Ramaswamy. I am from University of Houston Bar College of Business. We work in the PTAC segment funded by Defense Logistics Agency. PTAC stands for Procurement Technical Assistance Center. We help all the for-profit businesses and guide them to be able to sell to the government. And SBIR is one of the service we provide to all the for-profit business in the greater Houston area. We have over 1,000 clients. In fact, I have like over 200 clients. My background, I have an electrical engineering, electronics and telecommunication engineering, and computer science background. And I initially started my career at Bell Labs, and I had over 23 years at Bell Labs, developing chipboard systems, software solutions. And then I was managing advanced technology operation as a chief technology officer there. And then we had our own company. And in that company, we were providing IT business solutions to federal government for over 20 years. And then I moved over from New York, New Jersey area to the state of Texas here in Houston, and joined PTAC as their advisor. That is my whole career. Here I'm trying to help the small businesses move up and grow, and then be able to easily sell to the government. Having said that, what I'm going to do today is trying to address one of the requests with Beth and Lene had, which was dealing with the accounting and budgeting section for people who are in the initial state of their business or who would like to know how to go about and organize themselves in that area. So what I would cover is accounting system and how do you make that compliant with government requirements, and then the associated cost components that comes from the accounting system, the FAR regulation, and how these three play a role in you being able to go back and developing your pricing and budget models. Okay, that's the goal here. And I have a very short 30 minutes, so I'll try to get the maximum I could to you guys. And now, accounting system. Accounting system is a process of recording financial transactions pertaining to your business. Now, these transactions will lead you to and help you summarize, analyze, and report on these transactions to oversight agencies regulators and tax collection entities. And these oversight agencies are your DCAA, which is the Defense Contract Audit Agency, and DCMA, which is the Defense Contract Management Agency. And the tax collection entity is your IRS. So let me give you a brief on what the accounting cycle is. Basically, your transactions come in a chronological order, and you record those transaction in a journal. And that journal sits in the general ledger, and the general ledger has whole slew of the accounts that has been established by your company, and those accounts are your balance sheet account, your asset account, your liability account, and cost accounts, which is direct cost, indirect cost account, and costs that are not allowed to be included in your pricing model. All of these can be developed within the ledger, and you can capture those through the transaction process. Now, we also have a trial balance concept where it's a mechanism that is used to tally and balance your debit and credit entries within the accounting system. Now, if you cannot balance it, in case there is a mismatch, what your CPA or you will do is you will have temporary adjustment accounts, and that you create within the ledger, and then balance it out. Once you balance it, and that system can be used to create reporting. And there are several reports you can create, and those are the balance sheet, your income statement, your profit and loss statement, and you can also do aging reports. Like if you submitted an invoice to somebody and you want to be able to get paid, and it's 30, 90, 60, 90 days, you can generate the aging reports. And that is very, very important to have this accounting system, because that is the only way you can capture all the cost elements that are required for you to develop your pricing model. And now let's move on to the cost components. Now, this slide is very intense. The reason for that is I want to completely give you in one slide the whole cost picture. So the cost component is all the cost elements that goes into your accounting system. And these composition of costs can be found in your FAR regulation part number 31-201-1. Okay. Now, before we venturing into understanding these costs, I want to introduce you a terminology which is called cost object or cost objective. That is used in cost accounting language to describe something to which the costs are assigned. Namely, you can assign to a product line, you can assign to a department, or you can assign to a geographic territory. Now, there are two types of costs. One is a direct cost, and the other one is an indirect cost. The direct costs, these are costs that are accountable to a single cost objective or a single project. Let me give you an example for that. Basically, when you have a manufacturing line, production line, you will have a laborer there, or a labor there who will be producing a widget. And as it translates through that and he completes a project, he's a direct labor working on a single project, and the project is to manufacture that particular widget. So he's a direct labor. And any costs that is the material cost associated with that single, I think it's called other direct costs. So these are the cost components that are deemed as direct cost, and that is the way they are launched into your chart of accounts and captured by your accounting system. And there is a second one, which is called indirect cost. These costs are accountable to multiple cost objectives. Now, we have to understand what that means. Actually, basically, if you take a project manager, and that project manager could be managing multiple projects. So he will be putting his time to project one and project two. So now he is an indirect cost in that sense, but he's supporting the billable employees or the direct cost structure. So that's what he's trying to do. And then there could be a second category, which is administrative labors or administrative costs, where those are the costs which support your company as a whole. And those people are working on multiple objectives. They're also indirect costs, but there is a name for these two different costs. One indirect cost is called overhead, which support the billable employees, and the other cost is called G&A costs, general and administrative costs. You need to be able to identify these costs and then make sure you park these costs into the different chart of account categories. And then now there will be a question they ask you about the overhead and G&A costs. And I hear that all the time. What is the difference between the two? And as I just described to you, the overhead costs are costs that are supporting the billable employees or billable projects, whereas the G&A are costs that are supporting the infrastructure of the whole organization or your company. Now, there are several indirect cost components. Let me go first for the direct costs. There are direct costs. We talked about direct labor, direct travel, and subcontractors and consultants, everybody performing work on a single project. That's what they are. And any direct cost that is associated with it is called other direct costs. And then you can see this, and then in your company, you may have these costs which you are defined maybe more than what I defined in here. And those you need to understand, where do you park these costs? And on the indirect cost segment, you will have three components. The first component is fringe benefits. And those are costs which are the benefits you give your employees. So those are the fringe benefit costs. And then there could be cost, which is the overhead cost pool, which are costs associated with the labor and expenses that support, I mentioned to you, it supports the billable projects. And then you have a general administrative cost pool. And these are the three pools that are attributable to the indirect cost pool. And these are all captured in systems, just like the QuickBooks and other systems in the chart of accounts. So and then the last cost component is your unallowable costs. These costs are costs that cannot be included in your pricing model or a budget model when you're submitting a proposal. And these are like interest on your loan payment, or entertainment, or beverages, alcoholic beverages, lobbying costs, whole bunch of things I've given in there. So these are the ones which you have to be careful about. You don't include it as in your pricing model, but you must track these costs. And these costs are definitely going to be hitting your bottom line. So you have to be making sure you track these costs, but then you do not include it on your pricing proposal. Moving on. Now, how do you make your system compliant with the government regulations and requirement? Now, what do is you need to set up a system which is GAAP compliant. When I say GAAP compliant, it is the generally accepted accounting principle. That's the method you use to make sure you are complying with your accounting system, the way in which you set it up. And you can Google that, and then you can get all the important aspects of what a GAAP means. And then the second one is you need to have a system that can segregate direct and indirect costs. And we just saw what these costs are. And in the indirect costs, you should be able to even identify the different indirect cost structure, which is the fringe benefits and your general administrative expenses and the overhead expense. You should be able to separate that. How do you do that? By parking it in different section within the chart of accounts. And then job costing. Job costing is how you accumulate cost element by project. A job or a project number will be assigned. That's the way you do it for every direct cost transaction. And that's the way you maintain your job costing within this system. The next one is the timekeeping. We just heard from Lene how important it is to maintain your time system. So you need to have a compliant time system that identifies all the employee labor by projects and by contracts. And this you do achieve again by making your employees record the time in a timely manner every week, and making sure they park their time in the right project with their using the project code. Now you must have a payroll system, which is very, very important, where you accumulate the wages you pay and the benefits and taxes and are paid properly and tracked. And they will, when they audit it, they want to be able to find all these things in order. So that's the intention for this payrolls component. Now the labor distribution. The labor distribution system will let you know how you are charging your direct and indirect labor to appropriate projects or contracts. And that will be again achieved by making sure the codes you develop, the job codes, that will give you an insight how you go back and assign the different labor to different projects. And now then you have to exclude your unallowable cost. What you do in an accounting system is you will have a separate chart of account variable in there, which will start tracking all the unallowable cost. You'll park it in there, and then you will exclude it from using to develop when you're developing your pricing model or your budget. But then again, you'll be using that for the bottom line financial status of your business. You will be including that in those sense, but then you will never use it because the government does not want to pay or you cannot invoice the government for any unallowable costs. So then you can also identify cost by CLIN, and those are the contract line item numbers. And what this is actually, if you go to FAR Part 4.10, you will see where the government breaks down the contract by commodities being procured. What it is you can separate your labor hours, you can travel, and if you're buying the quantities, they will put quantity A for certain products, and like that you have an N number of contract line item numbers. If you look at the solicitation, you can see that in section B, I think. Yeah. So that's the way you do it. And the last one is government invoicing. The way in which you accomplish this in your accounting system is you will be following a standard form from the FAR Part 53, which is SF 1438. That gives you exactly the content that goes in the invoicing system. So basically what you do is you take that and you can design your own invoicing system with your logo and everything, but all the components that needs to be in that invoice will be from that SF 1438. So this, the 10 items will make your system to be government compliant. So it's not that difficult to get it compliant, but in fact, today, the QuickBooks, if you talk about QuickBooks, and they already come with full government compliance, actually. And one of the things I want to mention in this one, which I didn't mention here, is you also need to be able to segregate pre-award cost and post-award costs. And that needs to be also added because the government doesn't pay for the pre-award costs. So now this is a quick capture of how you go back and look at the required capabilities of your accounting system. I'm not going to go over this. Basically, you have to look at SF 1408, which is the pre-award survey that you will use to make sure whether your system is compliant. Again, they give you all it's tabulated. You go back and there's 3 columns in there. You have to check yes, no, or maybe whatever it is, and then you would come back with all the required thing which we just discussed. Okay, now from the accounting system, I'm translating over to the FAR regulations. Okay, this is also a very important component that impacts your pricing. Now let's talk about the FARs. How did FAR come about, right? Congress usually passes laws, and then it gets all of this, it gets into the Code of Federal Regulation. And the Code of Federal Regulation has 50 different sections, 50 titles. And section 48, title 48, is the one where your FAR is. And if you go and go click on this reference, which you will get later on when they submit when they supply you with this presentation, you can go back and click on the link, and you will be able to go see all the FARs. So now, why did they have this FAR? What is the purpose of this FAR? They wanted to make sure that whatever they procure or contract is done through uniform policies and procedures. So when they do that, what happens, it satisfies your customer, who is the government agency, needs in terms of cost, quality, and timeliness of your delivery. That's the three things they want to accomplish in there. And then also it'll minimize administrative costs for you as the vendor or a business, as well as the client, because you don't have to go back and forth. There'll be clear demarcation of all the requirements you need to follow, all the regulations you need to follow, so that the cost will not be overrun. And then it enables you to conduct business with integrity, fairness, and openness. Okay. Now, what are the contents of the FAR? There are 53 parts in FAR and 2 appendices. And the parts 1 to 51 provides you the instructions and guidance for procurement and contracting. For part 52 provides you with the provisions and clauses that go into a solicitation. You can modify them, you can create, modify, and manage the provisions and clauses under the solicitation. Part 53 gives you the forms. There are several forms. We just talked about the SF 1408, SF 1438, like that you have for security clearance. They use the SF 86. And like that, there are several forms in there, and that you need to follow, and in different engagement with the government. Next, appendices 1 and 2 talks about your cost accounting regulations. Now, I pulled in a couple of parts from the FAR section 1 to 51 that impacts your pricing. So those are, if you take the item number 12, 13, 14, and 15, they actually go back and talk about the method of procurement. So you may have, the government may procure commercial item, or they can use simplified acquisition procedure, which is a FAR part 13, by using their P card and BPAs. And for those, they use the RFQ method of procurement. RFQ stands for request for quote. And for sealed bidding, typically a construction contract or some contract where the actual procedure process and the actual requirements are clear, they prefer to bid it using a sealed bidding process. And they use invitation for bid in that process, which is for part 14. And the last one is contract by negotiation. Where do they do that? For large procurements and complex procurements, they will use an RFP where you will have several factors and several volumes you do in the proposal, and each volume will carry a weight, and all the volumes will add up to 100%. And those are corporate experience, and then your past performance, your quality and management principles that you manage in your company, and then you also the pricing. Everyone will carry a weight, and based on the weight, they look for the best value. So accordingly, what you do is you'll go back and develop your pricing based on what the different method of procurement is. And the last one on this is a 16, where you can talk about the different types of contracts they float. One is a firm fixed price contract, where you will be proposing a firm fixed price, and that price will never change during the entire project phase, and unless there is a change order which the government requires. In here, you have to be very careful when you propose a price. You own the risk. In other words, you can't change. If something goes wrong, you have to bite the bullet, and profit or loss is yours. And so it's risk-free for the government. On the second case, they use the cost reimbursement. These are for contracts where they may not have a clear a long-term understanding of how the project is going to go. So what they do is they try to allow the people to negotiate with the vendor on a cost plus fixed fee basis. And again, there'll be a ceiling in the negotiation, and then the payment will be divided equally month to month, whatever the negotiation would be, and that's where you get paid. In this case, there is no risk to the government and no risk to the vendor or the business. And the last one is they have an IDIQ contract, which is the infinite delivery, infinity quantity contract. These are for contracts where the government has a lot of things that needs to be done. They are complex in nature or simple in nature. They don't know how much. So they will issue a IDIQ solicitation where many companies can participate, and they can award multiple companies, large and small. They can have a group of small companies who get the award and a group of large companies who get the award. And these IDIQ contracts have no cost value. And they are actually, once somebody wins the contract, they will issue task order as they have a requirement that pops in. So that could be actually floated among the small businesses or the large businesses, or they can have an open competition as well. So that's the way, though, it's on a task order by task order basis, the actual contracts are executed. And now, you can also look at for Part 31, where all the contract cost principles are and procedures are defined, so that you can go back and look at it yourself on the for Part 31 area. Basically, they carry all the definitions and the type of contracts with commercial organization, which is you. And as a commercial organization, that's what they define in there. So basically, this is very, very important. And the reason I said this will determine how you price is when they float some contracts, they can judge you by looking at the low price. Case one is low price. Case two will be low price technically acceptable. And the third one is best value. And these will drive you how you develop your cost proposals. Now, how do you take these and develop your price model? So basically what you will come up with is a direct base rate first, and then you will have the indirect rate. When you add these two, you will get a burdened rate. And then when you add the fee to it or the profit to it, you get the fully burdened rate. That is your base billable rate. And this will be utilized to develop your final cost proposal. Now, as I told you, the proposal pricing is impacted by your accounting system. So you have to have a clean accounting system, and all the data entry must be complete. And then it must be compliant with the government requirements. And then you'll have government requirements driving your price as well, which is the solicitation on the FAR. And you will have the different award methodology we just talked about. And those are your low price or best value or low price technically acceptable. These three are the basis of the award. And the last one, which we didn't talk about, is the competitor pricing. There are several sites out there where you can go back and look at what other people have charged for certain labor rate, and you can use that as a reference point. One of which I can tell you is an acquisition.gov, and that one is Calc, which is a contract awarded labor category. And there are a lot of GSA schedules, and then they pull from those awards and look at all the labor categories in there, and they give you the low, minimum, and maximum, and the average. So you should be able to easily go back and find out where you need to be when you are developing your pricing model. So now I'm going to go through a quick scan of what do you need to do to develop your burden rate. So basically here, what I'm showing you here is a base rate calculation. A company that works 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, 52 weeks in a year, the total working hours paid will be 2080. and let's say you have an employee whose base salary is $75,200. So his base rate would be $75,200 by 2020. That gives you a $36.15 base rate. However, if you're going to entitle him with 25 days of paid days off, and that'll be 200 hours, you got to subtract that out. So he will be working only 1880 productive hours. In that case, when you take the productive hours as the base rate, and then you will come, I'm sorry, and that will be 75,000 by 1880. So you get a $40 rate. So when will you use this? When will you use this? The hours work rate versus the hours paid rate. If you have a long-term contract, and then you'll use the hours paid. But suppose you have a contract that is seasonal, you want to be able to recover all the benefits you pay that employee. So you want to be, and also there's a risk involved, so you'll be charging higher rate. And this is the way you calculate it. Now, this is your base rate. And then the next one, I'm sorry, the next one would be, how do you calculate a fringe benefit rate? So you calculate, these are all costs I pulled out of the air. Nothing is real factual, is all assumed. And so please do not take this as a reference. And this is a sample only. Now, in this case, based on all the different cost components, when you add them, you get a $25,000 fringe benefit for a particular employee, and that employee is paid $75,200. So how do you calculate the rate? Basically, what you do is you go and take the $25,000, which is the cost, total cost incurred for that employee, divided by the base salary, and that you get your rate. And in this case, it's 31 plus percent. Typically, the fringe rate is between 28 and 32% typically. And if you that tells you how you take care of your employees. And the more you do, the better off for the employee and better off the company to retain that employee and to make sure that your projects are done without a lot of rotation of employees. And then what you do is you add to that, your rate will be total 47.68. All of this you do to recover your costs. Now, in this slide, sorry.
Ron, I just wanted to, sorry for butting in. I just wanted to let you know we're coming up almost to the end of the webinar, and I don't mind running over maybe 5 or 10 minutes. If
absolutely.
Like
I'm going to go very fast on this. Yeah, this will go in about 5-10 minutes, maximum 5 minutes. Okay. Thank you very much for reminding me.
We have a couple of questions for you to answer also.
Absolutely. And I can stay here forever to answer the question. Don't worry. So the first one is here we got the fringe benefit pool, which I discussed earlier, overhead cost pool, and G&A pool, for which I just same way I did for the base rate. I just computed some values in here, and then this is for the other direct costs. When you did that, you have to normalize that and come up with your derived rates. And these things are going to come out of your accounting system. So if you normalize it for the $340,000 of total base cost, what do you do is you take your individual costs for fringe, ODC, overhead, and G&A, and then you normalize it, you get all these derived rates. But actually, you got to follow the total fringe cost base example as it actually is, and then you will derive and then input it into your system, which will spit out these rates. So with this rate, you will be coming up with your final burden rate. So basically, for $100,000 guy, if you beef him up with the fringe rate, you get 61.68. So you recovered your fringe expenses, and then you add the ODC, and then now you recovered your ODC expenses here at $73.88. Same as you go along the line, you recovered all the way, and this is your burden rate. Again, now there's a profit. I assume the 5%. Again, profit is a variable. It is up to the scenario. What industry are you in? What services are you providing? Whether there's a risk involved. As an example, suppose you're selling a commercial item due to national emergency, that item is not available, and a vendor is giving that item, and that vendor will charge a higher premium for that item. The government will go ahead and buy it. And same is the case on a service-based project. if suppose somebody is there sitting in an office, and basically that office is a secure environment, developing a software or something like that, risk is minimal, as opposed to you sending somebody to a forward operating base where the risk is very high, so the rates will be different. Okay, so so the profit factor, after you put the profit factor in, you get your final fully burdened rate. This is what you'll be using for your final rate and coming up with your pricing proposal. And that ends the pricing section. I give pricing successful proposal for government contracts webinars every month. If anybody is interested, you can come. I just gave you the next month's link, and that will be more relaxed, and you will have more time to spend on each subject. And then you have useful websites, which is DCA sites, Department of Labor site to calculate the wage determination, and your payroll tax tables. You have to update this frequently. Then your SF 1408 template, and then how to prepare your contract proposal. I just pulled these together, and then your per diem rates and your market research. And then that's about it. Any questions? So did I make it to 6? Yeah, 6:02, 2 minutes over.
You are fabulous. So if you'll look over in the Q&A box, I don't know if you have that pulled up already, Ron, but we have a couple of questions that you could answer quickly. Jian Shang asks, for company, does IDC rate need to be pre-negotiated?
What is an IDC? Indirect direct cost, or?
I'm assuming.
Yeah, I think it's indirect cost. That's what he's trying to.
Right.
Yeah. So you do not negotiate anything with it. It's what you incur within your company. Because if you look at indirect costs, I told you there are two indirect costs. One is your overhead that's supposed to be billable employees. Government does not worry about that. Whereas when you have a GNA, and if they look at it, what happens is when you submit your cost proposal, if they ask you to submit in a sealed envelope to find out what assumptions you had and how you develop this cost, what the source selector will look for is your fringe rate and your GNA rate. They don't have any opinion on overhead because it supports your billable employees, which is the fringe rate. If your fringe rate is high, they don't have a problem with that because they know that you have good employee benefits and you take care of your employees, there's no problem. But whereas when you look at a GNA rate, if it is very high, they don't like it. So they want to make sure that your company is not top heavy. So you need to watch out for this. So to answer your question, you don't negotiate it. It's what you have in your system. You want to keep it optimal. That's all you need to do. And it's actually whatever it's costing you, that's what you're going to declare. And as far as the fringe cost, fringe is not considered as a direct cost, it's an indirect cost.
Okay, great. You got both questions at once. Terrific. Ron,
thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
I went too fast, it's very hard to compress the subject.
Yes, and thankfully we're going to have your presentation, and anybody in the audience can also reach out to you and get more information and also attend your subsequent classes. I think it would be good actually for all of us working in the SBIR world to go through your classes. Thank you so much. This was really a great presentation. I really appreciate it. Beth, are you still with us?
Yes. Let me just wrap up by saying thank you for everyone who's with us, who joined us. Ron, thank you so much. I look forward to working with you. That was so informative, so interesting. Everyone join in next week. We have one more session with Mark Benden. He will be moderating another panel with faculty and some community members who have had success with SBIRs. So more chances to ask your questions. I will be sending out a video link for a recording, and you will also get a link to all of the presentations, both from today and from last week. So we'll see everybody next week. Thank you, Lene, for all of your help.
My pleasure. Ram, thanks again. This was really terrific.
Thank you very much, Lene and Beth.
Okay, we'll speak to everybody soon. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Thank you.